You know, for a man half this keep calls a monster, you're unfairly handsome.
Say that again. Elara Voss. You have no idea what you just...
The Alpha King of Blackthorn was not supposed to shake. Elara Voss knelt beside his chair, with his wrist held between careful fingers, counting a pulse that stuttered where it should have been iron steady. Kael Draven sat still while she worked, sleeves pushed to the elbow, jaw locked with the particular patience of a man who did not like being examined and was tolerating it anyway. "Hold steady," she murmured. "I am steady." "Your hand isn't." She turned it over, watched the faint tremor run through his fingers and vanish, and leaned closer, chasing the thread of scent beneath cedar and leather and old wood smoke. Something bitter, something that did not belong on a king. He went quiet in the particular way she'd learned meant he was watching her rather than the room. When she finally looked up, close enough now to see the flecks of amber threaded through gold, the words simply escaped her before sense could stop them. "You know," she said, "for a man half this keep calls a monster, you're unfairly handsome." The chamber went very still. Kael rose without a sound, crossed to the door, and turned the bolt. When he faced her again, gold had spread through his eyes until nothing human remained in them but the intelligence behind it. "Say that again," he growled, the words dropping low enough to vibrate through the small chamber. Not a question, not quite a command. She could have laughed it off. Instead, she held his gaze and let the words come slower, deliberate. "You're unfairly handsome, Your Majesty, for a monster." He crossed the room, not fast, not crowding her, leaving her the space to step back if she chose. She didn't. He stopped a careful distance away, close enough that his heat reached her, far enough that nothing but his eyes touched her at all. "Elara Voss," he said, low, testing the shape of her name. "You have no idea what you just—" The alarm bell shattered it. Not the low toll for meals, but 3 frantic strikes that meant blood in the halls. Kael was already moving, already unbolting the door he'd locked seconds before, the king replacing whatever had almost happened between them in the space of a single heartbeat. In the corridor, a young guardsman named Reese was on his knees, clawing at his own throat, a small paper packet of ceremonial incense crushed and spilling from his fist. He'd come from the royal wing, from the restricted chamber where Kael's own rooms were tended, carrying, she would learn within the hour, a fresh delivery meant to replace the incense already burning there. Elara's stomach dropped straight through the floor. It's already inside the royal wing, she thought. It's already this close to him. Chapter 1. 10 days earlier. Elara had not wanted to come to Blackthorn Keep at all. She was 27, and she had spent more of those years around poison than most healers spent around medicine, trained by a chemist father who taught her to read a room by its layers of scent before she could properly write. She stood now in the muddy courtyard beneath Blackthorn's black towers, with her satchel of vials clutched against her chest, staring up at the fortress that had swallowed her older brother whole 3 years ago and never given him back. Rowan had written her 4 letters from this place before the letters stopped. "There's something wrong with the oil shipments. Don't ask questions when I come home. I'll explain everything." He had never come home, and the Crown had told her only that he'd left service without notice. The summons that brought her back had come sealed and formal, carried by an independent royal healer on Kael Draven's personal order. 3 guards fallen inexplicably ill, their strength gone, their wolves silent, every court healer baffled. Elara was one of perhaps a dozen specialists in the kingdom, trained to separate scent into its individual threads rather than read it as one whole. She had almost refused. Then she'd thought of Rowan's last letter, folded soft with handling, and packed her satchel instead. "You're the poison nose," said the guard captain who met her at the gate, broad-shouldered, easy smiling, a scar over one eyebrow that suggested he'd earned his rank honestly. "Dorian Vale. Half the keep's betting you're a witch." "Chemist," Elara corrected. No witchcraft required. He laughed and led her through corridors that smelled of wood smoke and old stone, past servants who dropped their eyes too quickly whenever the sickness came up in conversation. She was given a chamber near the healer's wing and, within the hour, summoned to the king. Blackthorn's throne room held no gold, no excess, black stone, iron sconces, a war table scarred with more use than ceremony. Kael Draven stood over it, and at 36 he was the youngest Alpha King in 3 generations to hold this fractious northern territory together without losing it to a rival's blade. He was tall enough that she had to tip her head back, scarred along one temple in a way that made him look earned rather than brutal, and the weight of his attention when he turned it on her felt like being noticed by a mountain. "Elara Voss," he said. "Rowan's sister." Her breath caught. "You knew him." "I employed him, meticulous with the ledgers." A pause, deliberate. "I was told he left without notice." "He didn't leave," she said, sharper than she intended. "He disappeared. There's a difference, Your Majesty." Something in his expression sharpened. Not offense, she realized, but interest, as if she'd handed him a piece of a puzzle he hadn't known was missing. "Noted. We'll return to it. For now, 3 of my guards are dying by inches, and my healers cannot name the cause. Then, let me examine them." He walked her to the healer's wing himself, past a court that stopped and stared and lowered their voices the moment his back was turned. She noted how guards straightened when he passed, how the fear in these halls moved like weather he simply didn't feel. And then, outside the sick room, a tall man in a commander's black and silver sash fell into step beside them, polished and composed, offering Elara a bow precise enough to have been rehearsed. "Commander Aldrich Thorn," he introduced himself, "War Master of Blackthorn. I've read every report on this sickness twice over and found nothing. I'll confess I'm relieved someone cleverer has finally arrived." He seemed, if anything, genuinely glad to see her. Competent, well-spoken, the sort of man a kingdom trusted with its army because he gave every appearance of deserving it. "If you need anything from the armory or the supply stores, Miss Voss, come to me directly. I'd rather this ended quickly." "I appreciate that, Commander." "I mean it," he said, and the warmth in it seemed entirely sincere. He bowed again and continued down the corridor, and Elara filed the exchange away without particular suspicion. One more face in a keep full of them. The first stricken guard, a broad young man named Bram, lay pale beneath wool blankets, his pulse thin and fast. Elara bent low over his skin, breathing in slow, deliberate pulls, sweat, iron, the sourness of illness, and beneath it, faint as a whisper, something bitter green and mineral that made the back of her throat itch. "There," she said softly. "Do you smell that?" Kael crouched beside the cot and inhaled, jaw tightening. "Nothing beyond the sickness itself." "That's the design. Whatever this is, it's built to hide from a wolf's nose." She sat back, already cataloguing which compounds could mask themselves so completely. "I need access to everything that touches your men daily. Oils, incense, armor polish, all of it." "You'll have it," Kael said, and beneath the command she heard something closer to relief. A man handed, for the first time, a weapon that might actually see his enemy. That evening, searching the old ledger room off the quartermaster's stores for anything documenting recent oil shipments, Elara found a storage crate no one had cleared in years. And inside it, tucked between account books, her brother's handwriting. Neat, careful, cataloging shipments of leather oil and ceremonial incense with the same precision she remembered from childhood, when he used to help their father label vials by candlelight. The last entry, dated 3 years and 2 months earlier, was underlined twice. "Batch 114, irregular, smells wrong. Will report to AT tomorrow." There was no entry after that, and the page that should have followed it had been torn cleanly from the binding. Elara sat on the cold floor with the ledger open on her knees, hands unsteady, and did not yet understand what the initials meant, only that her brother had found exactly what she was hunting now, 3 years before her, and had never come home to finish the thought. Chapter 2. She didn't understand the initials for 2 more days, and in the meantime, the investigation moved forward on its own uneasy momentum. Kael's private study became the center of it, not because it was convenient, but because he refused to be elsewhere while she worked. On the second afternoon, he watched her uncork a tin of leather conditioner with an intensity that made her fingers unsteady. "You don't have to sit through all of this," she told him. "It's tedious." "I have a war master for tedium," Kael said. "I have very few things I'd rather watch than someone who might save my men." She fought a smile and lost. "That's either a compliment or deeply concerning." "Both," he said, and something in his mouth curved that made her chest go warm. She forced her attention back to the tin. Leather, tallow, clove oil for preservation. And there, buried deep, that same bitter green thread. "Here, this is it, or close to it. Cedar leather oil is what your quartermaster uses to treat every strap and buckle in this keep. Whatever's hidden in it is built to hide inside a scent your men already trust." "Explain that." "A wolf's nose reads scent as a whole impression. Familiar, safe, ignore it. Mine's trained to break it into layers. Cedar on top, tallow beneath, and under both of those, something that doesn't belong at all." She held the tin toward him. "It's not accidental. Someone built this specifically to defeat a Lycan's senses without ever defeating mine. Why would it touch a wolf harder than it would touch you? I don't fully know yet. My guess, it isn't only in your blood, it's in whatever binds a wolf to what he is. It dulls the connection instead of just the body. I'd be ill from this. You'd lose your strength, your senses, your shift, all of it, because it isn't only attacking a man. It's attacking everything a man like you carries besides." Kael was quiet, absorbing that with the same stillness he brought to war councils. "And a cure?" "I don't have one yet. I have a theory." She'd spent the previous night testing counteragents against a sample. Ironroot, ground fine and steeped, seemed to weaken the residue when she introduced it to a treated cloth. Burnt cedar smoke, oddly, seemed to help restore scent clarity in the small experiments she'd run on herself. "It's unproven. I'd rather not test it on a man until I have to." "Understood." He studied her a moment longer than the conversation required. "You found something else. I can see it on you." She hesitated, then told him about the ledger, batch 114, the torn page, the initials she didn't yet understand. Kael's expression didn't change dramatically, but something behind his eyes went carefully, deliberately blank, the look of a man choosing not to say a thought aloud. "Show me when you're certain what it means," he said. "Until then, tell no one what you've found. Not Thorn, not the quartermaster, not even the council. Until we know which link in this chain is poisoned, we trust none of it." "Not even Thorn? He's been nothing but helpful." "Helpful men have hidden things before," Kael said simply, and did not elaborate. She thought about that as the days passed. The quartermaster, a nervous, precise man named Aldous Tanner, ran the same supply routes Thorn oversaw and had access to every batch that crossed the keep's threshold. And when Elara mentioned batch 114 to him in passing, testing the reaction, he went pale and stammered something about a shipment lost to spoilage that year, quickly changing the subject. It was, she thought, exactly the reaction of a guilty man, or exactly the reaction of an anxious one caught discussing a shipment he'd mishandled honestly. She couldn't yet tell which. On the 9th night, a second guard collapsed, this one from the eastern barracks, nowhere near the royal wing, and Elara found the same bitter thread in his boot leather, treated weeks earlier by a Fenwater merchant's traveling shipment, rather than the quartermaster's stores at all. For one entire day, the investigation tilted toward an outside source, a contaminated batch from beyond Blackthorn's walls, an accident rather than a conspiracy, until Elara traced the Fenwater leather back through its purchase record and found it had been ordered, oddly, through the same restricted supply account that funded the royal wing's ceremonial incense. Someone was routing poison through more than one door. By the 10th night, the tremor in Kael's own hand had grown pronounced enough that Elara finally refused to let him deflect it any longer, and demanded to examine him properly in a private study, where she made the most professionally disastrous compliment of her life. The alarm that interrupted them brought them both into the corridor to find Rhys on his knees, a crushed packet of incense spilling from his fist. And this time, Elara knelt over him with the full weight of everything she'd learned, already sharpening her hands. "He's been in the royal wing," she said, checking his pockets. "This is a replacement packet. Fresh incense, meant to go into your private chamber tonight." She held it to her face and caught unmistakably a stronger, more concentrated version of the same bitter thread. "Kael, someone just tried to double your dose." Chapter 3. Rhys survived the night, weak but breathing, and by morning Elara finally laid Rowan's ledger flat across the war table for Kael to study properly, for the first time. "Batch 114, he read aloud. "Reported to AT." His jaw tightened. "There are 2 men in this keep with those initials. My quartermaster. And my warmaster." "I know," Elara said quietly. "I've been trying not to think about which one it means." Kael turned the ledger toward the light, studying the shipping mark stamped faintly beside the entry, a small sigil she'd taken for decoration until he traced it with one finger. "This is a military routing code. Quartermasters don't use these. Only supply lines that cross into contested border territory carry this mark, which means whoever authorized Batch 114 had authority over troop movement, not just kitchen stores." His eyes lifted to hers. "That narrows it to 1 man. Thorn." "I'm not ready to say that in front of my council," Kael said. "A warmaster's authority touches every root in this kingdom. It's possible the code was misused by someone beneath him without his knowledge. I need more than a stamp before I accuse the man who commands my army." He paused. "But it's the first thread that's pulled tight instead of loose. Keep it close." That evening, walking the corridor back toward her workroom, Elara found herself telling him about Rowan without entirely meaning to. The way he used to sneak her into their father's workshop after dark. The 4 unfinished letters. The 3 years of not knowing whether she was owed a grave to grieve or a door to wait beside. "I keep thinking he's going to walk through one of these doors," she admitted, "which is foolish." "It isn't." Kael's voice had gone low, unguarded in a way she hadn't heard from him yet. "I trusted the wrong report when he vanished. I was told he'd gone home ill, and I never questioned it. Rowan paid for that failure. I will not repeat it." It was the most human thing she'd heard him say, and it loosened something tight behind her ribs. The moment didn't survive Dorian Vale, who found them there with an easy grin and a genuine reason for interrupting. "Elara, I know the old supply entrance on the eastern wall. Rowan used to meet me there when a shipment came in wrong. If you want to see where he worked, I can show you before the frost seals it for winter." It was, she recognized immediately, an offer worth taking on its own merits. Nothing to do with the king standing beside her. "I'd like that." Kael didn't forbid it. He didn't scowl. "Take an escort," he said even, and then, once Dorian had gone, added quieter, only for her, "I trust you entirely. I dislike the way he looks at you as though your kindness promised him something it didn't." "That's almost jealousy, Your Majesty." "It's entirely jealousy," he said without apology, and the certainty in his voice did something to her pulse that had nothing to do with fear. The walk the next morning was cold, brief, and genuinely useful. Dorian showed her the old eastern gate where Rowan used to inspect deliveries, and mentioned, almost in passing, that the last shipment Rowan had flagged as wrong had come through under a Fenwater merchant seal, routed by the Warmaster's office. Another thread, pulling tighter. That evening, drawn back to the study to compare notes, Elara found Kael waiting by the window, a single candle lit against the dark. "The pack leaders' gathering is in 6 days," he said without turning. "Every rival alpha in the north under this roof. If someone wanted me weakened in front of all of them, 6 days isn't much time. No. He turned, and whatever careful distance he'd been keeping between them all week seemed to dissolve at once. His hand lifted, slow, brushing a strand of hair back from her face. If I kiss you right now, Elara, I want you to understand it won't be a small thing. I don't do small things either, she managed, breath catching. He leaned in, close enough that she felt his breath against her mouth. The alarm tore through the keep a second time, sharper, more urgent. A guard's voice in the corridor. Attack at the eastern gate. Kael went rigid, the king reclaiming the man in an instant. Stay here. Lock the door. He was gone before she could argue, and Elara locked the door as ordered. Minutes later, a bitter chemical scent seeped beneath it, followed by the unmistakable crash of breaking glass from her workroom 2 doors down. She pulled the study's alarm cord and waited until Garrick answered before opening the door. Together, they reached the workroom. It stood ransacked, her sample cases overturned. 3 vials of tested wraithbane residue shattered across the floor, and the fresh batch of royal incense, the one meant to replace that night's supply, gone entirely from its locked cabinet. Whoever had staged the eastern attack had wanted Kael gone from this wing for exactly long enough to erase her evidence and finish what Rhys's crushed packet had started. Chapter 4. The eastern attack turned out to be 3 armed strangers, cut down at the gate before they breached the wall, their bodies unclaimed, but not unmarked. Elara, summoned to examine them, found a broken glass vial in the pocket of the nearest, its residue matching the bitter thread from the leather oil precisely, and beside it, a small lead token stamped with the War Master's private seal, the kind used to authorize covert payment outside the Treasury's official ledgers. That's not proof he ordered this, Kael said grimly, turning the token over in his palm. But it's proof someone paid these men with his coin. And while you were down here, Elara said, someone finished what Rhys's incense started. My samples are destroyed. The evidence I'd already tested, gone. Then we rebuild it, Kael said, and we say nothing of what we've lost. They did, over the following 2 nights. New samples, more careful this time, hidden rather than catalogued openly. It was on the second of those nights, returning alone from the healer's wing past midnight, that Elara heard footsteps behind her too late, soft and deliberate in the narrow servants' corridor, and a gloved hand closed over her mouth before she could turn. Quiet, a rough voice hissed. The commander only wants a conversation. Fear and fury collided in her chest. She drove her elbow hard into her attacker's ribs, twisted, and when his grip loosened enough, bit down on the gloved hand until he cursed and screamed, one sharp, desperate sound that tore down the stone. The response was immediate. A shape hit the alcove like a thrown spear, and her attacker was simply gone from behind her, slammed into the far wall hard enough to crack stone. Kael stood over him, eyes blazing full gold, claws extended dark from his hands, a growl rolling from his chest that she felt in her own bones. Are you hurt? He said. Not a question. I'm fine. Her voice shook more than she wanted it to. The man lunged with a knife. Kael caught his wrist and broke it with a sound that made her flinch, pinning him bodily to the stone. Who sent you? Thorn, the man gasped, pain and fear stripping any loyalty from his voice. Commander Thorn. He said the perfumer knew too much. He said if she connected the ledger to the shipping code, it was finished. Kael's grip tightened, gold burning brighter, and for one long moment, Elara thought he might end the man where he knelt. Then, visibly, he mastered it, jaw locked, breath ragged, and struck him once into unconsciousness instead. Take him to the dungeons, he told the guards who came running. Alive. I want a witness statement, not a corpse. Only once the man had been dragged away did Kael turn fully to her, the king's control cracking to reveal something rawer beneath it. I heard you scream from 2 floors down, he said. I have never moved that fast in my life. You got to me in time, she said softly, and pressed her palm flat against his chest, feeling his heart slam beneath her hand. He covered it with his own, holding it there, closing his eyes for one long breath. Then he looked at her. Really looked. Gold steady, restraint finally, visibly spent, and said, low, "Tell me to stop." She didn't. She gripped the front of his shirt and pulled him down the last inch herself, and when his mouth met hers, it was nothing careful at all. Hungry, certain, one hand sliding into her hair, the other pressed firm against the small of her back, as though he meant to hold the whole shaking length of her together with just his palm. She kissed him back with everything 3 years of grief and 10 days of wanting had built up behind her ribs, and when they finally broke apart, breathless, his forehead came to rest against hers. That, he said roughly, was not small. No, she agreed. It wasn't. He straightened, and the king returned to his shoulders even as his hand stayed at her waist. Thorn knows we're close, which means we move faster than he expects, or we lose everything Rowan died to give us. Chapter 5. The witnessed statement, given the following morning in exchange for consideration at sentencing, confirmed what the token had already suggested. Thorn had authorized the Wraithbane shipments, routed them through the Fenwater merchant seal, and funded his accomplices outside the Treasury's official records. Rowan, they learned, had discovered an early experimental shipment 3 years before. Thorn had silenced him, then spent the intervening years refining the dosage, securing a hidden supplier, and replacing key men in the supply chain. The gathering of the Northern Alphas offered the first opportunity to turn Kael's collapse into more than an assassination. Under Blackthorn's emergency law, an incapacitated king temporarily surrendered military authority to his war master until the Pack Council appointed a regent. Thorn did not merely intend to remove Kael. He intended to inherit command, while every rival alpha in the north watched it happen. But none of that told Elara exactly where Rowan had been taken, and Kael refused to leave that question unanswered. "There's a tunnel number," Elara said, staring again at the torn edge of her brother's ledger page. "Not written. Pressed. He used to leave shorthand in wax when he thought someone might read over his shoulder. I didn't notice it until now." She held the page to the candlelight, and the faint impression resolved into a string of numbers her father had taught them both as children, a private cipher meant for nothing more serious than hiding sweets from each other. "Lower tunnel. Cell 4. Ask BW. BW, Kael repeated. "There's a retired dungeon warder by that name, Brennan Weller, pensioned off 3 years ago, unusually generous terms for a man of his rank. Garrick found him within the day, in a cottage near the Western Farms, and it took very little pressure, only the truth of what Elara had found, before the old man broke and admitted what he'd buried for 3 years. A prisoner, brought down under false papers, held without trial, dead within the month of confinement, his body moved and his cell sealed on the War Master's direct order. They went down together, Kael, Elara, Garrick, through tunnels that hadn't seen torchlight in years, to a cell with a rusted door, and inside it, a moth-eaten blanket, a broken quill, and scratched into the stone in the same private shorthand Rowan had used since childhood. "E, if you find this, I love you. Trust no one until you're certain." In the adjoining chamber, beneath loose stones Weller directed them to, they found what remained of him, enough, with the family ring still on one finger, for Elara to finally know rather than merely fear. She sank to the floor and wept, not the careful grief she'd carried for 3 years, but something whole and unguarded, and Kael knelt beside her without a word, gathering her against his chest, while Garrick stood watch at the tunnel mouth and gave them what privacy the moment demanded. "He was still trying to warn me," she said eventually, "even at the end." "He succeeded," Kael said against her hair. "You finished what he started. That's not nothing, Elara. That's everything." It was that same night, exhausted past reason, that the Wraithbane finally caught up to him entirely. He collapsed mid-stride in the corridor outside the healer's wing, and by the time Elara reached him, kneeling on the cold stone with his head in her lap, his golden eyes had dimmed to something dull and frightened, his wolf gone silent for the first time since she'd known him. "Iron root," she said sharply to the healers crowding around them, already moving. "Strong, steeped, as much as he'll drink. Burnt cedar smoke in the room, close as you can manage without choking him." She pressed the first bitter cup to his lips herself, holding his head steady. "Don't you dare look at me like that. I did not survive my brother's grave this week to lose you the same one." "I'm not dying," he rasped. "You'd better not be." It took hours, not minutes. His breathing steadied slowly. Gold crept back into his eyes by degrees rather than all at once, and by dawn he could sit up, weak but himself, though the effort of standing cost him more than he let the healers see. "I'm not fully recovered," he admitted quietly, only to her. "Weeks, you said, not hours." "Weeks," she confirmed. "But you're stable. That's enough for what we need next." "Then we let Thorn believe it isn't." His eyes were steady despite the exhaustion behind them. "Spread word that the antidote failed, that I'm bedridden, that command may need to pass. Let him believe his moment has finally come." He caught her hand. "I want him confident when he walks into that hall. Confident men make mistakes, cautious ones don't." Over the following 2 days, while rumor of the king's decline spread carefully through the keep, Kael authorized a covert search of Thorn's private stores, Garrick's men finding, hidden beneath false floorboards, casks of raw wraithbane root, a ledger of covert payments under merchant names that traced directly back to the Fenwater seal, along with proof that Aldous Tanner's authorization marks had been copied, rather than written by the quartermaster himself, and a fresh, dangerously concentrated batch of incense clearly prepared for the gathering itself. Combined with the token, the witness statement, Weller's confession, and Rowan's detention order, recovered from Thorn's own sealed files, bearing his authorization in his own hand, the case against him stood complete before a single accusation was spoken aloud. "Everything," Kael said, laying it across the war table. "Now we let him walk into the hall believing he's already won." Chapter 6. The great hall of Blackthorn had never held so many powerful wolves under one roof. 6 northern alphas at the long stone table, their retinues lining the walls, the air thick with the particular tension of predators sharing space by treaty rather than instinct. Thorn stood near the king's empty chair, composed, already speaking in low, confident tones about the burdens of command in a crisis, when the great doors opened and Kael walked through them under his own power. He was pale beneath the surface, and Elara, watching from beside the wall with the evidence satchel in both hands, was likely the only person in the hall who saw the effort it cost him to stand as though nothing were wrong at all. Every other wolf in the room simply straightened, instinct answering him before thought could. "Your Majesty." Thorn recovered fast, but not fast enough to hide the flicker behind his eyes. "We feared the worst." "I was poisoned," Kael said, taking his seat with unhurried authority. "Slowly, over months, by wraithbane smuggled through roots under this kingdom's war master." Thorn's composure held a moment longer. "A serious accusation from a king rumor says hasn't left his bed in days. Do you have proof, Your Majesty? Or merely the fevered theory of a grieving woman you invited here without council approval?" "I have proof," Elara said, stepping forward, voice steadier than she felt. She laid it out piece by piece, the leather oil, the incense, Rowan's ledger and its shipping code, the recovered wraithbane casks from his own private stores. "My brother discovered this conspiracy 3 years ago and was murdered for it. I found where he died, Commander. I found the order that put him there. In your hand." Garrick stepped forward next with the witness statement and the search results. Kael himself produced Rowan's detention order and the covert payment ledger, laying military authority against political motive until the room had nowhere left to look but at Thorn. He didn't reach for a blade yet. He turned first to the gathered alphas. This king has weakened this territory with a decade of peace treaties that leave us exposed on every border. Would any of you trust a monarch too frail to survive his own supply chain? I have kept this army strong while he negotiated it soft. Ask yourselves who truly protects the North. For a moment, uncertainty rippled through the hall, until the oldest alpha present, a gray-maned woman from the western passes who had outlived 3 wars, rose slowly to her feet. I have watched Kael Draven hold this territory without losing a single border skirmish in 10 years, she said, voice carrying easily. I have never once watched him poison a rival to do it. Sit down, Thorn, before you embarrass what little is left of your name. The room's balance broke entirely at that, murmurs turning to open condemnation, and only then did Thorn's hand move to the blade at his hip. He never cleared it. Kael crossed the distance in a blur of controlled, terrible speed, closing his hand around Thorn's wrist and forcing the blade loose with a sharp crack of bone. You wanted me weak, Kael said, quiet enough that the whole hall strained to hear it, gold flooding his eyes, claws lengthening at his fingertips. You are about to learn I am considerably more dangerous when I choose judgment instead. He released him, stepped back. Let the claws recede. Take him to the lower fortress at Ravensgate, Kael told the guards. He'll stand a lawful trial before this council for murder, treason, and the poisoning of the crown's own men. If found guilty, he lives out his life in confinement under joint pack authority, where he can plot nothing and harm no one ever again. 2 days later, the council found Thorn guilty on every charge and sentenced him to lifelong confinement at Ravensgate under joint pack guard, stripped permanently of rank, title, and command. 6 months passed the way ordinary months do, stitched together from small things rather than one grand turn of fortune. Elara became the crown's chief perfumer and toxicologist, a position the council approved without dissent, once her evidence had saved the king's life in front of every one of them. She negotiated her own workshop, her own assistants, independent authority over every royal supply that crossed the keep's threshold. Kael visited most evenings, ostensibly for reports on incense purity, though he stayed considerably longer than any report required. She corrected Aldous Tanner's shipping ledgers twice a week and found, once the fear of accusation had left him, that he was simply an anxious, honest man who'd never deserved her early suspicion. Rowan was given a proper grave in the keep's gardens, beneath a young cedar tree Kael had planted with his own hands, and Elara visited it often now, no longer carrying the weight of it alone. On an evening in early spring, Kael found her in the workshop testing a new blend of frost lily and cedar, and shut the door behind him without being asked. I want you as my mate and my queen, he said. No preamble, no uncertainty in it at all. Keep your name, keep this workshop and every sharp edge in it that challenged me from the first night we met. But share my life, Elara. Choose me as completely as I've already chosen you. Her pulse climbed, steady and sure this time instead of frightened. That's a very direct proposal, Your Majesty. I've had 6 months to decide what I want. He closed the distance between them, cupping her jaw with a gentleness that still, after all this time, undid her completely. Be mine. Let me be yours. Yes, she said without hesitation. I will. She reached past him and slid the bolt on the workshop door into place herself. Kyle's eyes went gold at the sound of it. Say that again, he growled, rough and low, exactly as he had the very first night. Except there was nothing guarded in it now, nothing braced for refusal. Only heat and certainty, and a king who had finally stopped needing to leash anything at all. You're unfairly handsome, she said, fisting both hands in the front of his shirt and pulling him down to her level. And you're mine, and I'm choosing you. Good. His arms came around her, pulling her flush against him. Your fire was always what I wanted, never your fear. And when he kissed her this time, there was no alarm to interrupt them, no danger waiting beyond the door, only the low fire in the hearth, the scent of cedar between them, and a king who had finally been chosen exactly as thoroughly as he had chosen her. Which moment made you fall for Kael hardest? The first time he locked the door and growled, "Say that again," the way he reached Elara in seconds when she screamed, or the night she finally locked that door herself? Tell me below.